It was the decade of decadence, right here on VH1's list of the top 40 pop metal bands of all time. Next. Dee Snider here on VH1's top 40 pop metal bands of all time. So who makes up our top 40 list? Well, here's the deal. First, we looked at the music of all the popular 80s pop metal bands. Of course, we checked out how many hits the band had, how much chart sales success. Then we took a good hard look at the list and tried to assess their impact on music. And heavy metal hard rock was finally being recognized as an integral part of the rock and roll community. We all know that metal got its start with bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin taking rock to a new, heavier, and louder level. But in the 80s, it wasn't just music that drove the band or the bands into a frenzy. It was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. By the mid-80s, the genre had taken off, and that's what we're here to celebrate. That said, I think this band is one of the most underrated, and they started the whole 80s pop metal glam rock movement, and I'm glad we're recognizing them tonight. At number 40 is Hanoi Rocks. Finland's Hanoi Rocks formed in the late 70s. The band never charted in America, but their in-your-face attitude, kick-ass live show made an impact worldwide, inspiring countless metalheads and kick-starting a new era in rock. They're number 40 on our list of the top 40 pop metal bands of all time.
I think Michael Monroe and Hanoi Rocks probably had visually the greatest impact on the 80s.
We would dress like that and look like that nonstop. It was part of being young and having fun.
These guys would have to play a note. They just look like rock stars. They just look cool.
Never planned the image or, what we're going to wear or,
Lead singer Michael Monroe was the first to switch from dirt to Aquanet.
Mike was kind of printing it up all the time, like major makeup and a couple of cans of hairspray a day, I guess, that he would steal from girls.
They're not old enough to be the godfathers of glam, but they could have been because they had so many offspring that came out later on in the 80s.
Guns N' Roses was so impressed by Hanoi Rocks that they re-released the band's entire back catalog. Axl even made an appearance in lead singer Michael Monroe's solo video. Rock and
roll. It's cool, man. Some band has sold like 100,000 million records, and cites you as their influence. It's very flattering. It's cool as hell.
Other Hanoi disciples included Poison, LA Guns, and Faster Pussycat.
They heavily influenced bands like Us and Guns N' Roses and even Motley Crue.
I moved to LA in '87 and I couldn't believe my eyes. Everybody looked like us.
I think that some of the other 80s bands were almost happy that Hanoi Rocks wasn't bigger, so this way more people couldn't see where they took some of their ideas from.
In 1985, the band broke up, but their music and style live on.
Hanoi Rocks is as important an underground band as any band in the history of rock.
I really wish they could have been more successful and people could have appreciated them a little more.
At one time, Extreme had some of the biggest rock songs, but it was the acoustic ballad More Than Words that helped the Boston band sell over 2 million copies of their second album, Porno Graffiti, and put them at number 39 on our list of the top 40 pop metal bands of all time.
In order to cross over and get the massive appeal and move over into the world of pop radio, these artists had to have a couple songs on their records that also would appeal to the mainstream, so to speak.
When More Than Words came out, it was like instant reaction. People were, calling MTV, let's see the video. For it to go up to number one, something we had never expected it to do.
It must have been a matter of weeks where our lives were like flipping over.
It's funny because we were on tour with Extreme when More Than Words hit. They just said, "Excuse me," and they, of course, exploded. It was a great song, and then we ended up opening up for them.
Mothers were showing up, at our shows.
They weren't about the visual of big hair and the bright colored outfits and everything else. I mean, they really crossed a lot of borders. They were more reminiscent of a Queen than I think they were a lot of the hair bands of that era.
Extreme called it quits in '96. The guys continue to make music. Singer Gary Cherone enjoyed a brief gig as the lead singer for Van Halen, but Extreme will always be their crowning achievement.
Probably because of our hair, you know, they put you in this hair band thing, and you're a metal band thing, but we're just Extreme, you know, and hopefully someday we'll be just called Extreme.
Just wasn't enough having the song. Even having the song and the great-looking frontman wasn't quite enough. They had to find a point of entry into a very crowded marketplace.
Now, it's true you had to have more than great music to make it in the 80s. Sometimes bands even needed a gimmick to break into the big time. Now, for some bands, hair and makeup, wild clothing was enough, or at least as far as they go, like moi. For others, their off-stage persona became as rebellious and loud as their music, like him. And yet for others, it was just another way of making their mark. Coming up next, Jackal. Now, Jackal made their name with a chainsaw. A chainsaw? At number 38 on our list, Jackal. These Southern rockers hit big in 1992 with their self-titled platinum debut. Jackal became instantly infamous for their live performances, which featured over-the-top stunts and the use of a very special piece of hardware.
Anybody who thinks of Jackal is immediately going to think of Jesse James Dupree and a chainsaw.
I've heard of other bands that played with a chainsaw, you know, play around with it. I mean, we actually incorporate it to be the musical instrument that it is.
As much as people might mock them for that chainsaw, you know, set them apart from everybody else. It was part of the band, and it was something no one else had.
A band wielding a chainsaw was bound to cause chaos, especially at a concert.
I remember I worked security at Summerfest in Milwaukee, and Jackal headlined one night, and I remember an entire pit full of security guards running for cover, scared beyond belief, when this just whacked out Southerner whipped out his chainsaw and started just hacking into his bench that was on stage.
What a better combination, the chainsaw, rock and roll. It's loud, it's aggressive, it's abrasive, it's destructive, it's smelly. When the smell of that twin oil and gasoline hit the air, it's what we call the high of the 90s.
There wasn't anything Dupree wouldn't do to make sure his band's music reached the masses.
Won't sell our album, so we're gonna come for all you shoppers and do some rocking and rolling.
Kmart was not carrying our records, so we figured we'd just go play for the Kmart shoppers. So we pulled a flatbed tractor trailer rig up in front of the Kmart, and we start jamming. Police came and shut us down.
Jesse James released a solo album in 2000, but Jackal is still very much together and still going strong.
That's the essence of rock and roll. You know, we don't care about the stage. We don't care about the look. We don't care about, you know, everything being perfect and sound checks. We just want to get out there and rock, and that's what Jackal did. And that's what Jackal, I mean, to this day, that's what Jackal do. They still tour, and they, you know, still draw a crowd.
All Jackal is a country band turned up to 11 anyways.
That's the way we like it.
Steelheart never went platinum. They never even broke the top 20, but the band still had all the right ingredients for metal success in the 80s. Lots of hair and a hit power ballad that made girls swoon, guys jealous, and one-hit wonders.
There's no image more vivid when you mention Steelheart than that guy just leaning back, screaming, "Rah!"
It's just awesome.
Steelheart released their last album in 1992 and disbanded shortly after, but their lone moment in the limelight secured their place in pop metal pantheon. Counting our way down to number 1. Now, not all bands originated in the 80s. Some of the musicians kick-started their career in the late 70s. Night Ranger's guitarist Brad Gillis played with Ozzy, and keyboardist Alan Fitzgerald played with Montrose. You know, we don't get no respect. I was a classically trained countertenor, for God's sakes. There were a lot of great talented musicians in the hair and heavy metal bands of the 80s. And while Night Ranger's background and experience may not have been in the hair band realm, ultimately, they got sucked into. At number 36, Night Ranger. The band didn't wear makeup like Cinderella or get as many girls as Motley Crue, but they had a top 10 hit that became an 80s rock staple.
Sister Christian, oh, the time has come.
Night Ranger's Sister Christian was anthemic to that early 80s.
Okay.
Here was this song, it was everywhere. This song really connected.
Ranger was much more of a rockin' band than that song ever portrayed him. Also, two of the greatest guitar players in a single band. Don't Tell Me You Love Me, You Can Still Rock in America. Just some great songs.
The band parted ways in 1990. Reuniting 6 years later, they've been recording and touring ever since. At number 35 on our list of the top 40 hot metal bands of all time, Faster Pussycat. Formed in 1985, the band's punk glam looks and hedonistic stage presence were an integral part of the LA rock scene. Lead singer Tammy Down even owned the Cat House, the rock club featured in the movie Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years. The band released 3 albums. They broke out in 1990 with the top 30 ballad House of Pain.
We were on tour with Motley Crue and had like a top 30 single, and that was just whoa. You know, we couldn't expect that. So, I mean, that was awesome. That was the pinnacle of it for us.
They were a lot louder, sleazier, a lot more obnoxiously dressed than a lot of the bands of that era. And that was part of their charm.
They took their raunch a bit further with a little soft porn.
And we got the name Faster Pussycat from a Russ Meyer film called Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. It's like a 60s kind of B movie. Actually, it was rated X, but there's no nudity in it. It's just because of the cleavage.
There was always a sexuality that drove Faster Pussycat that I think really made them mean that much more to a lot of people. They really played up the sleaze card a little bit more than a lot of other bands did.
I think Brett Muscat at the time was probably the prettiest boy on the planet. You know, all the girls just absolutely loved him.
When you went to see Faster Pussycat live, I think that you definitely got the sense that they had influenced the people there. You dressed like you were going to a Faster Pussycat show.
It was fun. Everybody wanted to have a good time. It's starting to get back to where people are having fun going out again and getting dressed up and making themselves look a little more wild and crazy again.
At number 34 on our list, Autograph. The band rocked the 80s metal scene, largely considered a one-hit wonder because of the top 40 smash, Turn Up the Radio. Autograph still cranked out 3 gold records and had everyone knocking at their door.
Here's the autograph. Sorry, dude, it's closed rehearsal. What? No way.
Autograph, Turn Up the Radio. That was their song. It was an anthem for radio.
It was basically like a statement, you know, come on, man, let's turn up the radio and rock it.
They were really smart in making it about radio because every radio programmer wanted to play a song as kind of like their theme song to turn up the radio.
Even though the band only had one huge hit, leader Steve Plunkett left a lasting impression. Although the band broke up in the late 80s, the guys will always share a place in rock history with one undeniable anthem. Okay, so we've seen some hair, checked out some outrageous clothing, and even got a little chainsaw action on the side. Well, while image and style were important, that wasn't enough for some bands to break through. Even musicians with a solid underground following and straight-ahead rock tunes weren't cutting through. And the power ballad. Most bands had them. Most power ballads were tear-jerky, sappy, love, I miss you songs. Others added a whole new chapter to the phenomenon. With their hit, Don't Close Your Eyes, Kix helped a lot of kids deal with the gruesome subject of suicide and made an even bigger impact on their fans. Kix started out in Baltimore in 1978, playing small clubs and perfecting their high-octane mix of wacky stage stunts and AC/DC-inspired songs. Over a decade later, the group hit the jackpot when their fourth album, Blow My Fuse, sold over 1 million copies. Kix is at number 33 on our list.
Kix was sort of fashioned after AC/DC, the Bon Scott style AC/DC.
They were around on the circuit in Baltimore doing their thing as a bar band, and they didn't really have an image. They were just stripped down blue-collar rock music, and when success hit, they had an image.
No, I'm not really embarrassed by it, but the image thing, that was pretty much my own thing. You know, I did what I wanted, so, you know, that was cool.
Kix was another band that was great live, and what they did best was really get on stage and crank it out. 2 guitar players and Steve Whiteman running around like a nut, just in your face, really a lot of fun to go see live.
In 1989, Kix went all the way to number 11 with Don't Close Your Eyes, a power ballad with an anti-suicide message.
Don't Close Your Eyes added a different chapter to the whole ballad. I mean, here was a song that was a tearjerker about suicide, and it became a suicide anthem.
They know that she talks, body talk, pictures I can see. She talks, body talk, body talk, body talk.
Although the band called it quits in 1996, the guys are still making music today and remain one of the 80s great unsung heroes.
They were a great rock band, and they got categorized in the 80s scene because they just so happened to be of that genre. And to me, their music is timeless. You know, I think they were one of the great rock bands that still haven't gotten their due. You know what I mean?
Emerging in the late 80s, Saigon Kick wasn't exactly glam, but they did have one unstoppable power ballad in Love Is On The Way, which went all the way to number 12 in 1992.
When they broke huge with Love Is On The Way off the Lizard, that was it. That made it very easy to take them and push them up with the Every Rose Has a Thorn and the Heavens and all the power ballads.
We tend to get put into a category with those bands.
I think that's when the band was over. That's when it was over for me.
The thing about Saigon Kick is that they tried to introduce some different sounds and some rhythmic things into their music that were kind of different. They may have seen where things were going, and they were kind of, in terms of their look and their sound, just a little bit ahead of the curve, I think, at that time.
See, the thing about this band that's so misunderstood is we were too edgy. We started in the bridge between when glam metal was ending and right at the time when bands like Jane's Addiction and Soundgarden were still really, really underground.
Today, the guys in Saigon Kick rock on in separate outfits, satisfied with the mark they've left behind.
And the true fans, the true industry people that know Saigon Kick, give the band credit for what we actually did.
I won't even say what kind of an impact we made now, because I think the impact is just going to keep getting rediscovered.
Here's one band you are going to want to spark up for. It's Tesla. Tesla wasn't your typical 80s rock band. These platinum sellers preferred a more casual look.
We're just a jeans and t-shirt band, you know? We're just your real basic guys, you know? Just straight ahead, serious rock and roll.
The sum of their parts equaled one amazing band.
Formed in 1985, the band cranked out a hard blues-based rock sound, releasing 5 albums, bagging 2 top 10 singles, and hooking millions of fans in the process.
The image was a necessary evil. You had to be a little bit larger than life. So of course Tesla were going to play with the image.
This is a great decade.
Love Song was really the song that just launched them, you know, into the top 40 realm of being superstars.
I always knew it was a great song. I always felt it was a single.
After breaking up in the mid-90s, Tesla reunited in 2000 for some live gigs, and they don't plan on quitting anytime soon.
We had traveled for about 12 years, and kind of we like took 5 years off, and now we're back together, and we're like fresh and a tight unit again.
At number 30 on our list, Bullet Boys. The band shot to the top in the late 80s thanks to their singer Mark Torian's snake-like moves and radio-ready blues riffs.
I remember Mark Torian and his just crazy on-stage dancing. He had this dynamic aura, and then he just did this, like, the predecessor to Axl on stage, like with his little shimmy snake slither thing across the stage.
But some critics thought the Bullet Boys were the second coming of another huge 80s band.
Bullet Boys were the Van Halen stepchildren. They were on the same record label. They were produced by the same guy who produced Van Halen. I think discovered by the same guy.
We got thrown into a category of being a Van Halen-esque type of band.
They were very much cut from the cloth of early Van Halen in their sound, in their approach, and in the fact that they were very groove-oriented. All their music kind of grooved.
Eddie Van Halen asked that question personally to us. You know, how we were at his beach house hanging out, and he asked us, what do you think about the Van Halen comparisons? And it's just like, what's wrong with being compared to one of the greatest rock bands of my lifetime?
Sales of the band's self-titled debut skyrocketed after MTV played the hell out of the video for Smooth Up In Ya.
Our first video, Smooth Up, was #1 on MTV for about 5 or 6 months when they had Dial MTV.
Hi, we're Bullet Boys!
We just couldn't get off the air because it was shot so well, and the performance with the band was pretty epic for that time.
And we didn't know that video was going to be responsible for us selling 500,000 records within 6 months either, but it very much was responsible for that.
Bullet Boys are also responsible for inspiring a fashion trend or two.
One of the hugest things in the 80s, which was the pants with things sewn on all over them. His look was kind of like a black turtleneck thing with the sleeves cut off, and definitely the very colorful jeans type of thing.
After a brief split in the 90s, Bullet Boys released a greatest hits collection in 2000 and are still giving die-hard fans what they want out on the road. In at number 29 on our list of top 40 hot metal bands of all time, Trixter. They were 4 teenagers from Paramus, New Jersey, and a handful of catchy rock songs. The band was just playing for kicks, but in 1990, their rock and roll dreams suddenly came true. Their self-titled debut album went gold, giving Trixter a chance to rock their hometown.
The night, we played for the first time played the Meadowlands Arena in New Jersey, that was our ultimate dream from day one. It's all we ever wanted to do.
It was pop rock with a high energy kick.
Trixter wrote these really fun songs.
We were just lumped into the hair band thing. Cutie boys with long hair, something to that effect.
You are what's going on, and if you're not, you're a caveman, I guess. We were in the 80s. Hey, man, everybody knows, there's no denying it. Everybody had long hair. Not everybody.
The big joke in the band was, you'll see, by the time the album comes out, my hair will look great. Then the album came out, hair needed some work. By the time we get on the road, my hair will be cooking. Don't worry about it. It'll be great.
Trixter may have had the looks, but they steered clear from hair metal glitz.
We were just wearing flannel shirts and just, hanging out with our friends, going to the diner and, throwing the football around or something like that. It was just a little
cartwheels.
We were a bunch of kids that we were having a great time, and we just wanted to rock and roll.
We talked about the life we were living, and every lyric, every guitar chord, every note that we played was real.
Can we ride
The band broke up in 1995. The guys are all grown up now, but they're still living out their rock and roll fantasies.
We really haven't changed much. We grew up. We're not 17 and 18 years old anymore. So it's cool. You know, we're older, but we still have fun, and we're still rocking.
The hair was just kind of a given at that point. It was like you needed hair to compete. Well, you couldn't come out with flat hair in the late 80s and stand a chance, because everyone's like, what the hell's wrong with you? Don't you care about what you look like? I mean, that's the hair everybody wanted, and they needed it.
Working our way down to number 1. Now, not all 80s pop metal bands were about glitz and glamour. Some traded their lace for leather, makeup for tats, and cowboy boots for motorbikes. While surrounded by the glitz and glamour of LA Sunset Strip, LA Guns opted for something a little different.
We didn't really try hard with our clothes during that whole period. It wasn't like we were getting outfits together and there was a certain, you know, uniform that we looked like. It was mainly us just winging it and maybe getting influence from each other. And it was always a hodgepodge of clothes with us. We didn't really put that much effort into it. It was just us.
And their music, well, it sort of reflected their look. At number 28 on our list, LA Guns. The dark horses of the LA rock scene, these guys didn't rock bright spandex and day-glow makeup, but they sure had the hair.
We were very much like a sort of leather band, you know, the hair thing wasn't that important, you know, it was always dirty hair, I hate to admit, but, you know, we weren't as groomed as a lot of the other bands.
I think the one constant for LA Guns was always the black. The black hair, the black leather jacket, the black leather pants.
It's a sexy look. Jim Morrison looked great in leather pants. He was the one that made it look really good.
Everybody's trying to make us like these other bands, but we were so happy just being ourselves. Even though those bands were doing so well, they were goofy, man, because they weren't being themselves, you know?
It wasn't an image, it was who they are. There was something there that a lot of these bands didn't have. And I think they are definitely one of the unsung heroes of the late 80s and early 90s.
The band's albums were as hard and as uncommercial as their looks. But in 1989, the Guns took everybody by surprise when their song, Ballad of Jane, hit the top 40.
It was the standard thing to do, wasn't it? On the third cut of the record, you'd put the ballad. It was weird because it didn't seem to fit with everything else. But, you know, it came out and it was the biggest song on the record.
That success followed the band's boldest move.
Tracy Guns cut off his hair for this video. That was a huge move, considering everybody still had hair when this clip was made.
Everyone had, like, you know, it was the big hair farmers, you know, their hair was getting bigger and the teeth were getting wider and, you know, it was getting so cheesy.
He showed up on the Ballad of Jane video with his hair completely cut off, and, you know, it was shocking at first to see him.
LA Guns only hit the charts once, but they were the undisputed kings of their hometown.
It was a great decade in LA, you know, and we really ruled the town, and there was nothing off limits. And it was just a really great time around here.
These days, the Guns remain masters of their domain, a prominent part of the LA rock scene.
Rock and roll guys supposedly are, in prison terms, lifers. You know, you go into prison because you killed somebody, you're in there for life, you know. That's the whole myth, that's the whole magic of it, that's what makes it rock and roll. You know, someone's got to keep it alive.
At number 27 on our list, Stryper, the Bible-thumping metalheads who proved one thing: Christians rock.
I don't know if the right title is a Christian band, because that kind of misleads a lot of people. What we call ourselves is God rock.
That made them kind of the outcasts at one level, but they were great musicians. So at the same time, you had a lot of people who were willing to say, you know what, maybe that Jesus guy's okay.
The band perfected its yellow and black attack in the mid-'80s.
Everything was yellow and black. The staging, the amps, the lights, the clothes. It would make you dizzy.
They were real kind of cartoony as a band in their black and yellow. That was their image. They were like bumblebees with Bibles.
After years of struggling, the band's prayers were answered in 1986 when their second album, To Hell with the Devil, went platinum and even nabbed a Grammy nomination. 2 years later, the band reached new heights when the power ballad honestly ascended into the top 40.
And when that single took off, we had to stay out on the road, and we stayed out and stayed out and stayed out and stayed out. And that was during the time we moved from theaters to arenas, and it just exploded.
The band parted ways in the early 90s, but the guys still play live from time to time and crank out the classics for their loyal fans.
Come and have a good, clean blast and just enjoy the music and have a great time and leave feeling good, you know?
Now, some 80s pop metal bands may not have had the big-ass hair or the cheesy outfits, but their presence was strong and their music rocked. They didn't have the makeup or the wardrobe of your average pop metal band, but Mr. Big did have the hits to match. Formed in 1988, the band didn't reach the top until 4 years later, when the power ballad To Be With You went #1 in 11 countries, all thanks to Eric Martin's soulful singing and Billy Sheehan's masterful bass playing. They're number 26 on our list of top 40 pop metal bands of all time.
Mr. Big were great musicians, kind of an 80s supergroup. They made records that were definitely melodic and had pop sensibilities to it while still being able to show off their chops.
Billy Sheehan knew, you know what, I'm Billy Sheehan. I'll play my bass in circles around these guys. I don't need to tease my hair, and I don't need to spend 6 hours in makeup to be able to do it. And we're, you know, a pop phenomenon. Skip the rock crowd, just go straight to top 40 radio because this song is so huge, it doesn't stand a chance.
We're nearly as cute as like Poison or Winger or Warrant. So those people rejected us. Because we had songs, the players rejected us. So we were basically a band without a country.
Mr. Big bounced back in the 90s, playing to sold-out crowds all over Asia.
We must have struck a nerve somehow with the Japanese audience. The record entered the charts at #1 video, #1 everything. We couldn't be more thankful. Really great to us there. We were really appreciative.
At number 25 on our list of top 40 pop metal bands of all time, they hit the road as the opening act for Kiss, scoring lots of chicks and making a couple of naughty videos along the way.
We kind of went for the jugular with this whole sex thing because we were looking for an angle. I mean, there were a million bands doing the exact same thing.
The band's first video, Naughty Naughty, was exactly that.
I remember the video for Naughty Naughty. There was that silhouette type of thing that was going on in the background with the girl dancing.
Naughty, naughty.
Danger rode the scene that was so hot.
You know, put it this way, we had our fun.
But just as the band's career was heating up, the scene was cooling off.
By the time Danger Danger came in and were really in the height of their success, other bands were already on the decline, and the whole genre in general was on the decline.
The whole thing seems to me like it's a bit of a blur. Just 2 videos, and we were in and out before anybody knew it.
They were the best that era had to offer because they wrote fun songs, and they wrote good, catchy songs, and they were the worst that era had to offer because they were the imagery, and they were the whole package just to the T. Some people might say that was the best the era had to offer, but ultimately that was what killed it.
Danger Danger is still making records today, releasing The Return of the Great Gildersleeves in 2000.
I'm glad we just didn't become a nostalgia act. I don't want to go out and just keep playing Naughty Naughty and Bang Bang every year, and that's it. We're moving on, and we're proud of our past. Never deny it. I love what we did. We had fun.
Firehouse didn't release their first album until 1990, but the band had all the makings of an 80s metal act.
They got put in that category more so because of their look than their actual sound. They had the look that went with that whole genre.
They had the great pop songs, and to top it all off, they had ballads that would stop the world at Top 40 radio.
I'll never forget the first time we went into our record company when we got signed. They hooked us up with a marketing guy, and he said, all right, the most important thing is your hair. And we were like, huh? We thought it was the music.
That's what was really happening at the time with the big hair. You know, I mean, that was the style.
Whenever the record labels get involved and see the chance to make more money, they're going to make changes, and I think that's something that really happened with Firehouse.
And you look back on it now and you're like, well, but nonetheless, it kind of fits in with what was happening at the time.
With Love of a Lifetime, Firehouse produced one of the most recognizable power ballads of all time. It hit the top 5 in 1991 and drove the band's self-titled debut to double platinum success.
There were a number of bands that came out and had songs that could be easily used as wedding songs or prom songs. I think probably the biggest one was Love of a Lifetime. To this day, it's probably like the wedding song for anybody that grew up in the 80s.
Firehouse still burns in the new millennium, releasing their 6th studio album in 2000 and sticking to what they do best.
We've always considered ourselves, through the trends, through the styles, just a straight-ahead, all-American rock and roll band.
Raise hell! Women in metal had never had much success. Yeah, there were a few along the way that touched your heart or ripped it out, but for the most part, metal remained a male-dominated field until a cute little foursome threw everyone for a loop. Vixen. Vixen never went platinum. They never even broke the top 10. It wasn't easy for the all-female band to steal the spotlight in the male-dominated world of metal in the 80s. But in a time when most of the boys were trying to look like girls, none of them could compete with Vixen, who flaunted some of the tightest clothes and biggest hair of the era. Vixen's number 23 on our list of top 40 pop metal bands of all time.
They had some of the biggest hair of anybody, guy or girl, I've ever seen.
Everybody was competing to have like the highest, the biggest hair
After
possible.
a while, it just gets ridiculous, you know.
Truckload of hairspray on the road.
The birth of Metal Lilith was Vixen. And they came out with do's as elevated, mullets, female mullets for days.
At least they were women looking like that, because there were just as many guys that were looking like Vixen at the time as well.
Yeah, we just ran out of hairspray and went and borrowed theirs.
When you looked at Vixen and thought they were all dudes, they look like Poison and they look like all the other bands.
We did get mistaken for Poison once. We did.
They even copped a Poison-esque sound on minor hits like Edge of a Broken Heart. But these girls weren't always treated like one of the guys.
When we had just come out, we released our record. There was a radio station, and I won't say what city it was in, but the guy came on the air and just looked at our CD and said, "Oh, bunch of sluts," without even hearing the music. The fans seemed to really like it a lot. We got a lot of compliments, and not just for girls. You know, they'd come back and just say, "Yeah, you know, the band was great." Attitude, energy. Yeah, it just balls out rock and roll.
Roxy Petrucci on the drums.
I don't think the female bands really even stood a chance against the male bands, and I don't think it's fair to even compare them, because as far as the girls go, they were watching the males for certain reason.
We had our share of groupies.
They were funny.
If they came backstage,
they were really shy.
Just kind of stood there and looked at us.
Just want us to sign their shirts or their,
I think male
their
groupies are
chest.
different than women. They don't just drop their pants for us. Darn it.
Nixon wasn't around much in the 90s. These days, the girls may or may not reunite. Either way, as a women-driven hair band in a metal man's era, the girls' influence still burns. In the mid-'80s, Blackie Lawless and his band Wasp shocked the nation like no other artist since Alice Cooper, with their outrageous looks, risque lyrics, and demented stage shows. Wasp crashed the scene in 1984 and went on to produce over 15 albums, featuring metal classics like Wild Child and I Want to Be Somebody, and the timeless Animal, Like a Beast. And even though the band never ruled the charts, Wasp's army of fans grew, remaining loyal to this day.
They were like straight out heavy metal, bandana wearing, chainsaw, crotch, flame, you know what I'm talking about.
Extreme with blades and leather and extreme cod pieces and stuff, and taking more of an S&M look and making it heavy metal.
I remember my father watching Alice Cooper on TV and looking over at me, and he said, "If you ever look like that, I'll kill you."
Blackie was more about just making you feel very uncomfortable because it was so rude. It wasn't that feel-good, let's up all night, sleep all day kind of a metal. It was dark theater.
Was the watermark. This is the spectacle, the big hair, the outfits, just the whole package.
They definitely pushed the visual aspect a lot in the 80s, the drinking of the blood, the costumes. Wasp wasn't really glam-oriented, they were horror-oriented. They tried to intimidate with their looks as opposed to look pretty.
I've been asked the question many times, what do you think about shock value and stuff like that? We never looked at shock value, never. It was just fun for us.
Wasp continues to rock like a beast in the new millennium with the release of Unholy Terror, and the band's shock rock legacy is hardly forgotten. Heading down to the #1 band on our countdown. While the image and style overshadow the music and talents of most of the bands, sometimes focusing on their look and clothing helped them get even bigger. This trend didn't just affect bands here in the States. Pretty soon, bands all over the world were catching on, and Sweden was no exception. And when Europe crossed the pond, American audiences ate it up. 14 years, fans and critics alike still can't free their minds of this song.
Kind of following in the path of We Are the Champions and Rock and Roll Night and Come On Feel the Noise. People don't know that's Europe. It's Europe. It's kind of almost become its own thing associated with sport.
You wanted bands that sold to the girls, and Europe were the epitome of that.
George have the most gorgeous body in the world.
I guess we're lucky that we look good.
Oh, baby.
If you buy our record, we love you, automatically. And if you come to see our concert, we love you even more. So come to our concert and let us love you, because we love to love you.
Europe broke up in 1991, but the band will forever be known for bringing a touch of Sweden to American hot metal bands. Got a lot of great bands coming your way, but first let's get caught up with who's hit the countdown so far. You know where we've been. Let's get moving towards the #1 band on the countdown. The Scorpions staged a German invasion in the early 80s, and the band more than compensated with sexy video vixens, controversial album covers, and innuendo-laced rock. Throughout their 30-year career, the band has produced over 20 albums, selling over 20 million copies worldwide. The Scorpions come in at number 20 on our list.
Hi, I'm Klaus Meine, and we are the Scorpions!
Kicking off the MTV era, Rock You Like a Hurricane was a Scorpions breakthrough hit.
There were like a couple hundred of girls that were painted all over the body.
We was in the days where video started. Nobody else did it before. And I think that was a good thing. Music and great drive and craziness. And that's what the song is all about.
They've even classed up their classics with the help of the Berlin Philharmonic.
The rock band like the Scorpions playing together with a classical legend, the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, was for us very exciting to record them and work with this orchestra, this symphonic trio.
At number 19 on our list, Britney Fox. Their music never hit the top 40, but this guy band with a girl's name took 80s glam to its gender-bending max. The first video from the band's 1988 self-titled debut was Girl School, an homage to Catholic school girls that became a classic.
Northeast Philadelphia is just loaded with all girls schools, and they wear short skirts. A lot of times they get handed down, so eventually you have girls wearing skirts that are way too short for what they're supposed to be. That was the inspiration.
Sexy girl sitting in class, teacher all metal ruler, you will not like rock and roll. By the end of the video, the teacher is just as much part of the party as the girl.
The video's naughty gimmick made that song Britney's biggest hit, and 10 years later, it just might have influenced another Britney.
Girl School Video was almost a precursor to Britney Spears because it was definitely a Catholic schoolgirl type of vibe going on.
Back then we had Britney Fox, now you have Britney Spears.
Our first singer, he claimed some kind of Welsh ancestry, hence the name Britney Fox. It tied in nicely with the look and the ruffles and all that stuff.
They were almost like the Napoleons of hard rock. They were very dressed up.
And it got us noticed. Had we come out looking like nothing, we probably would have never got a deal.
Today, the band's still rocking out on the road, and they have absolutely no regrets.
Excess was the name of the game back then. It was the perfect time to be the rock star.
At number 18 on our list, the hottest band in the world, Kiss. The Brooklyn band started out in the 70s as painted-up comic book rock stars, but with the release of their 1983 album, Lick It Up, Kiss wiped off the makeup and hopped on the hair metal bandwagon. Gene traded in his trademark bun for a blowout perm, and Paul let it loose from his head down to his stomach.
Kiss is still Kiss. Same sort of energy and drive and commitment to doing everything short of killing ourselves to give people the best show in the world.
They were the innovators of the whole scene. They didn't follow it. And unfortunately, when the makeup came off, it made them look more like followers than the leaders that they actually were.
We didn't feel honest or comfortable with the makeup anymore because in hindsight, the makeup really belonged to the original lineup. And if we weren't a good enough band to exist without the makeup, then we were ready to face our fate. It was a renaissance or resurgence of a brand new band called Kiss.
The makeup never had anything to do with the bombs or the doing splits or whatever we were doing on stage comes from us. I mean, taking the makeup off doesn't change how we feel. I mean, we're the same people.
And they were still big sellers, releasing 3 platinum albums and scoring big video hits with Tears Are Falling and Heaven's on Fire.
Kiss were actually better musicians when they had the makeup off. Bruce Kulick, Eric Singer. I mean, you really They were probably some of the most underrated musicians out there at the time because everyone was constantly comparing them to the band in Makeup.
3 decades and 75 million in sales later, Kiss launched a mega tour that they swore would be their last, packing stadiums around the globe.
They'd actually now play to 3, almost 4 generations of audience when they play and do anything from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s.
We want to go out while we're still on top. You know, we're going to leave you with something that you're not going to forget. I call it entertainment.
Number 17 on our list, Skid Row. The band's first 2 albums took the country by storm, selling over 6 million copies and introducing America to the good looks and badass attitude of lead singer Sebastian Bach.
Sebastian, he's just psycho.
Sebastian was this enormous kind of rock god. You know, this kid is like 6'6". He had hair for days.
I have a problem with anything that's been done 30,000 times.
The band's in-your-face mix of punk and metal was a recipe for rock and roll rebellion.
Since I was born, they couldn't hold me down. That's everything that arena rock stood for. I mean, you know, just kids going nuts, pumping their fists in the air.
It's like an adrenaline rush. It's like a lightning, you know, bolt going right down your back. You know, you just get out there and go, "Wah!"
Of course, Sebastian's off-the-hook persona wasn't the only thing that caught people's attention.
Who from that era will ever forget Rachel Boland's nose ring to earring connection?
Psychotherapy, psychotherapy, psychotherapy.
The band never catered to mainstream expectation.
If you allow yourself to become a slave to what people expect, then what's the fun? You know, that's not what rock and roll's about.
Skid Row had this unbelievable looking frontman and wrote really strong songs. There was no gimmick to Skid Row.
The people that like Skid Row respect us for being like honest about everything, you know, and playing music that is honest and, you know, not a big scam or a big front.
And a second album that debuted at number 1.
Their songs were heavy enough to kick the shit out of someone to, and their ballads were tender enough to make out with your girlfriend to. I mean, there was just nothing about this band that wasn't done perfectly.
In 1996, Sebastian Bach went solo, and Skid Row has reformed with a new singer and drummer. But diehard fans still hope the original lineup will get back together.
If there's a band right now that could reunite and matter in the year 2001, it would be Skid Row, because they still have that pomposity, that big rock and roll in capital letters that, you know, could almost give Guns N' Roses a run for their money.
Now, part of the whole mystique of the era was the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And believe me, there was plenty of reckless abandon to be had. Great White's next, and as you heard, there was plenty of action happening off stage. They were notorious for their excessive behavior, and they're not afraid to tell all. Great White's image was strictly by the book, but the band's bluesy, Zeppelin-inspired sound scored more critical acclaim than most pop metal groups, and huge record sales too. They're number 16 on our list of top 40 pop metal bands of all time.
Just great blues-based rock and roll. That's what Great White was. They reminded everybody what it meant to play the blues, but to play the blues with balls.
They, like anyone, got sucked into the look and the image of the 80s.
Hair techs, yes.
I think the hair and the clothes all melded into that whole concept of excess.
But style wasn't the only thing excessive about Great White.
I was the poster child for excess. Are you kidding me? I've been arrested 53 times. I've been face down the dirt more times than I even like to remember.
They ranged from, like, you know, urinating in a rose bush to
fornicating with my girlfriend on my parents' roof. I mean, this is like weird stuff. You know, I'm up there, you know, having a good time. The cops fly over in a helicopter, right? My luck, right?
But these bad boys were all business in the studio. Their cover of Ian Hunter's Once Bitten, Twice Shy hit number 5 in 1989 and earned them a Grammy nod for Best Hard Rock Performance.
Great White did a magnificent cover of that track, and they added the elements of the girls. This is the first time you see Bobby Brown before her Cherry Pie appearance. Jack waves the girls in. Come on, girl, let's sing.
These days, instead of fishing for women, Great White is fishing for marlin.
Rock and roll's my life, but I live to fish.
Lita Ford first gained notoriety in the 70s playing with Joan Jett in the all-girl group The Runaways. But in the 80s, Lita went solo. Her hair got bigger, her wrists got harder, and her clothes got tighter. Her videos are visual time capsules of sexy, leather-clad 80s fashion. But she wasn't all image. Her shredding guitar solos made her one of the great guitar goddesses in rock history.
I did a good thing. I got in a fight.
Lita Ford was as close to there being a female guitar hero as we've ever had.
The big blonde hair, those cool-looking BC Rich guitars.
Oh, this is the goddess now singing.
I like to see women that play, you know, the videos that have women in them that play the guitars and women on the drums and, you know, doing things instead of just shaking their skirts around.
She was a real hero to a lot of women, and she turned on a lot of guys. When you have it all, and you've crossed over, what do you do for an encore?
Baby, I get so scared inside and I don't really understand.
And then she did the track with Ozzy, which was awesome.
Lita hasn't given up on her music yet. She released a live album in 2000, but she longs for the time when pop metal bands ruled the airwaves.
There was some great music in the 1980s. Powerful, earth-shattering guitars, blistering music.
White Lion had all the ingredients of a killer pop metal band. A sexy frontman, a day-glow wardrobe, 2 top 10 hits, and a double platinum album in the late 80s.
One of the more dynamic frontmen of the era. Some of the greatest musicians were in these bands, and they didn't get the recognition they deserved because of the way they looked.
They were very much based on a Van Halen principle.
Competition was Diamond Dave. Well, you better make sure that you can live up to that. We just fell into a time where videos exploded. So we kind of became almost the guinea pig, the scapegoat, more hair, more color, more girls. I live rock and roll till the day I die. That's the music I play, that's the only music I know, and that's what I do.
One of the most important musical elements for guaranteed success was the guitar solo. Every guitarist had to have their moment in the spotlight. Now, from a lead singer's point of view, I love the guitar solo. Add a sex kitten to writhe around during the solos, and you couldn't go wrong with Whitesnake. At number 13, Whitesnake, led by David Coverdale. For one hot second, they were one of the biggest bands in the rock universe. Their 1987 self-titled album shot straight to number 2 on the charts, sold over 10 million copies, and supplied the song of that summer. It didn't hurt that Coverdale's wife at the time, Tawny Katane, came along for the ride.
Tawny Katane came and got me, made me weak in the knees, made my blood turn to wine. It was a very heady experience.
Their songs are really strong, and they have some images embedded in the popular culture that will never disappear. Mainly Tawny Katane riding around on the hood of a car.
Everybody knew her. I mean, she was a very powerful figure on MTV back then.
During their MTV domination, Whitesnake never underestimated the importance of their own good looks.
When they blew up, David Coverdale happened to have, bigger hair than anyone out there. I think at the end of the day, Whitesnake were just a rock and roll band that got unfortunately pigeonholed by a bad hairdressing decision.
The band will always be remembered for one or two things.
Those videos define that era. You know, the car, the girl, I mean, all the tasty bits.
know, I mean, in the songs, too.
Next, number 12 on our list, formed in 1986. By the time the late 80s rolled around, the band was everywhere, thanks to a huge debut album, 2 hit rock songs, and 1 inescapable power ballad.
Well, Winger was a really fun band because we were really focused on musicianship, and we got lumped into the, quote, 80s band category, which was fine because we had a great time doing it.
But the band quickly became the brunt of everyone's jokes.
What's really great about Winger is here success came to a really good guy, Kip Winger. A great looking guy, a guy who paid his dues by playing bass behind Alice Cooper, a guy that wrote some really strong songs. Here's the unfortunate part. He became, because of Beavis and Butthead, everything that was absurd and wrong with the 80s metal scene.
That guy really dead?
He became like the poster boy for absurdity. And that's too bad, because 17 was another one of those anthems. A really good song.
Honestly, it gets a little frustrating when people focus on your looks. But I mean, I was out there selling that too. So, you know, I can't blame anyone for that.
They did get involved in that 80s look and the 80s hair thing very much.
The band faded away in the mid-90s, but Kip Winger's still making music. He's released 2 solo albums, and he's still defending the band's legacy.
We were just 4 musicians that came together and wanted to do a really cool band, but a lot of people that were kind of prejudiced against certain bands, and we were one of them, never did see us live, you know, maintain that prejudice to this day, I think.
You know, my band, Twisted Sister, was one of the few that originated right here on the East Coast, specifically New York City, the place that never sleeps. But in the early to mid-'80s, L.A. was a hot spot for metal, and specifically hair metal. The Sunset Strip, the Whiskey A Go-Go, Gazzari's, the Rainbow, all places where some of the biggest stars in rock got their start. And if you were out there, you know it was a big, wild party. You had all kinds in L.A. You had pretty boys with the frills and fringe and down boys with the leather and tats. But no matter how you look at it, they had the hits. In at number 11, Rat. They were one of the first bands to make an impact on the scene. It was all about frontman Stephen Pearcy's notoriously flipped hairdo, Warren DeMartini's manic guitar solos, and the band's fashion sense. Contagious hits like Round and Round and Wanted Man helped Rat sell over 3 million copies of their debut album, Out of the Cellar.
That was a hugely influential band. If you think about Bon Jovi's first real tour was opening for Rat. They were leaders, and they had all the elements too. They had this kind of arrogant, sexy frontman, guitar hero, great drummer.
I remember meeting Steven Tyler in '84, and he was like, Rat, right? Yeah, and he's going, dude, you made it, you made it. Round and round, look great. You know, he goes, the only thing is, man, you got to write your hair out more. And he's just like going like this. And like, okay. So the big hair, I was just following orders. You know.
Stephen Pearcy had that look where he almost, I think, was trying to be like a Rat. Like, he had this kind of rodent-esque type of movement and quality to him. He had the hair that was like a clump that hung over his face, where he's just kind of peeking out from under it.
But it wasn't all image. The band had musical chops too, putting out 3 more albums that all went platinum.
Rat, to me, was always a musical band. You know, Warren was an amazing guitar player, Bobby's an amazing drummer. Juan Trussier was one of the best bass players of the era, you know what I mean? Pearcy was that front guy, you know, he had the whole thing. They dressed really funny.
I define rock and roll music as a different breed of animal,
nice and nasty, safe sleaze. It's fun. It's interesting fun.
Rat's music eventually came to epitomize metal in the 80s. These days, Rat's lineup has changed, but their attitude hasn't. They're kicking as much ass today as they were in the 80s.
I'm here for the run. I'm doing this till I'm 70.
Still got lots of great artists coming your way, but first let's get caught up with who's made the countdown so far.
Jam, jam, rock and roll. More than words. I see the sun shining. Motoring in my house today. The radio. Oh, no. Love is on the way.
Only 10 more artists left. Think you know who's number one? Well, we've only got 10 bands left, and they all have big stage shows and music that help take the metal to the masses. At number 10 on our list, Dokken. Fueled by the intense power of George Lynch's guitar, the scorching vocals of frontman Don Dokken, and a series of videos, the band was pre-programmed for 80s glory. By the end of the 80s, they already scored 3 platinum albums.
It was an androgynous-looking band, Dokken was. Everybody knows that. That was what you had to be. You had to have an androgynous singer in the 80s, period. I mean, I don't know any bands. I can't name one band in the 80s that made it, that didn't have effeminate-looking, androgynous, you name one.
Dokken made quite an impression with their flashy and sometimes confusing videos.
None of it made any sense. All right, you guys do this now. You're firemen. Now you're going to swing over here, and there's a monster. Okay, now, there you are. You know, it's okay, that was great. You know, we loved it.
I remember the video for Breaking the Change because that was pretty ridiculous.
The second sequel in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, Dream Warriors, the theme, the video even starred Freddy Krueger.
It was a real good thing for us, and doing the video was just hysterical, and Robert Englund was a real swell guy. Nightmare.
The good times didn't last, and Lynch left the band to pursue a solo career. But Dokken still carries on, playing live and taking time to reflect on the past.
My biggest happiness in that band was the respect we got from the other bands.
Number 9 on our list, Slaughter got together in 1988 with one goal in mind, to be huge. The band's dreams came true in 1990 when their debut album, Stick It To Ya, went double platinum thanks to hits like Up All Night and Fly to the Angels. 2 years later, their second record, The Wildlife, hit the top 10 and sold over 1 million copies.
Slaughter had hair that was always in their face, but I guess the girls saw through it because they loved Slaughter, and I'm sure they still do to this day.
How could they resist?
He got this cute guy.
I know that it becomes this whole thing of, oh, they're a hair band. Well, you know, we were a band, we had hair, and therefore we are a hair band. I think that the 80s and the whole rock and the hair was one thing, but it was still about the songs. It was still about what was in your heart.
They had the appearance that a lot of bands really wished they could have. I mean, they were good-looking guys. They also had the music to back up their sales, and I think that was something that got overlooked by a lot of people.
Slaughter continued to record throughout the 90s. In 1998, guitarist Tim Kelly died in a car accident. The following year, the band released their first full-length live CD, 1998's Eternal Live, as a tribute to Tim's memory. Now into the next decade, Slaughter's still out there doing what they love best.
We're just a rock band. We love to rock. It's about the music.
Now, Def Leppard were the kings of fashion in the 80s. But sometimes when you're that fashionably conscious, you lose consciousness of everything else.
Bollocks fell out once. I was playing the acoustic, do you remember that?
Yeah.
I had no idea I had these jeans on, I think it was in the 80s or something. We were playing around in Canada.
You sure they weren't shorts?
No, I remember, I distinctly remember, and there's all these people pointing at me, and I looked down, and there's just, my jeans are just ripped, like, all the way there, and they were just hanging out, and I had no idea, and the rest of the night, I'm really self-conscious, you know, crossing my legs, and kind of cool.
Well, Def Leppard was known not only for their fashion, their music and stage shows provided fans with full-on assault of the senses. Formed in 1977, these Brits, with their trend-setting style, hockey haircuts, and a slew of arena rock anthems, exploded into pop blockbusters.
Joe Elliott, a lot of people took that look from him with the short on the side and the real long in the back.
Actually, all the way through the 80s, we were very responsible for inventing our own fashion. I've got nothing better to just tear off a sleeve here or razor blade these things up until they're just falling apart. Just to look different from everybody else.
Their laid-back image and radio-ready sound helped the band go from metalhead pinups to mainstream pop stars.
We attract a lot of female audience, or did back in the 80s, because we were young, not the ugliest band in the world, and lyrically it was very much the guys singing to the girls.
The band's seminal albums, Pyromania and Hysteria, sold over 21 million copies, securing Def Leppard's place as one of the biggest bands of the 80s.
There are so many albums that come out that just changed the face of rock and roll. And I think that Pyromania was one of those albums that came out and did that. It was a very well-produced album, but at the same time, it still had all the rough, raw, pop, energy, rock, wonderful songs. Radio played the crap out of it. I mean, who didn't love Pyromania?
Def Leppard made some of the finest metal records. When you heard a Def Leppard record, it was so perfect. There was not one minute moment that wasn't taken care of on that record.
Still together after 24 years in the biz, the band survived countless trends and continues to be a driving force in rock.
There's plenty of time for us to become hip again. We don't give up on the first time we get sand kicked in our face, go running off to mummy. We just turn around and kick it back and come back stronger.
Number 7 on our list started out in 1975. 8 years later, Quiet Riot made history when they became the first heavy metal band to have a #1 album on the charts. 1983's Metal Health went multi-platinum and scored 2 larger-than-life hits with Bang Your Head and Come On Feel the Noise.
Quiet Riot is the first band to ever have a heavy metal record go to #1 on the Billboard charts.
Turns out the band's ride to the top was anything but smooth.
The record company, the producer, they wanted us to do a certain kind of record. And it was fought all the way. They wanted to change the name of the band. They wanted to change the look of the album, the look of the band. They wanted us to get haircuts.
But the band refused and went down in the Metal Hall of Fame. After massive exposure on MTV, the band was writing the book on 80s style.
And we saw fans out there that were all wearing bandanas and striped things and a Target shirt like Rudy would wear.
For me, it was standard Italian poodle hair. You find any New York Italian, he's got black curly hair. And if you layer it and put bangs on it, it's a poodle.
It was definitely a fashion statement. Maybe a cheesy one, but it was a fun one.
But there are sometimes the band would rather forget.
And there's still a couple of things that make me squirm when I see it. But let me tell you something. That was honest.
I did it because I couldn't help myself.
In 1988, the lineup that made Quiet Riot famous went their separate ways. But 9 years later, they were back to making noise and banging heads.
They're still doing all the trademark stuff, and that's what they should be doing because they're Quiet Riot, and that's what they're known for, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Now, another ingredient was a stage show. Alice Cooper and Kiss kicked the whole thing off. The 80s bands took the ball and ran with it. The fans wanted a show that was larger than life. They wanted every dollar they spent on that ticket in the show. Big lights, lasers, huge mascots lumbering around the stage, lots of crazy antics, guitar twirling, you name it. Bands made sure you got the best bang for your buck. With synchronized headbanging, matching outfits, and glitzy light shows, Warrant was one band that did not disappoint. At number 6 on our list, Warrant. The band scored off the charts in the 80s style. Warrant took sexual innuendo to another level with their hit Cherry Pie, creating one of the most memorable video babes of all time.
There was never a more blatant sexual metaphor in any video or song than Cherry Pie.
Tastes so good, it's gonna make cry. Sweet cherry pie. Oh, yes.
It is as brilliant as sleaze has ever been.
Warrant didn't have to rely on buxom babes to be a successful band. Lead singer Janie Lane's Baby Blues also helped shoot the band's hit power ballad Heaven straight to number 2 on the Billboard pop charts.
Got a picture of your house, and you're standing by the door.
It was just the height of the 80s right there.
You were in a metal band back in the 80s and your hair wasn't sticking out. You were different. You were different.
The band has no regrets about their overblown looks. Both their albums in the 80s went double platinum, and they're still doing what they love most, making music.
I think the music's really important, actually.
In the mid-80s, Cinderella got their big break after John Bon Jovi caught one of their shows in Philadelphia. He hooked the guys up with a record deal, and the band was headlining stadiums in no time. Cinderella's look and sound took 80s glam to another level. Lots of scarves, buckets of makeup, and a string of blues-inspired hits. The band's first 2 albums, Night Songs and Long Cold Winter, sold over 3 million copies each. That success put Cinderella in at number 5 on our list of top metal bands of all time.
They were a great band, man, you know, and they still are.
Cinderella was theatrical, to say the least.
They were glam to the hilt.
The most important thing is the music, and all they talk about is what we wear.
The thing that I remember most about Cinderella was getting a copy of the first record and looking at the cover and seeing how glammed out they were. They were a much harder band on that first record than their image appeared to be on the cover of it.
The band's live shows were also heavy on arena rock gymnastics.
The other thing about Cinderella is the great guitar twirling tricks that they always did. It was like a big thing that they would take them and fling them around their neck, and then they'd come back and keep playing them. I think Cinderella was the first band to do
The rock and roll lifestyle to me is being on tour and playing gigs.
Cinderella's still living that lifestyle today, touring with Poison in 2000 and basking in their status as one of the greatest hard rock bands of all time. Motley Crue got together in L.A. back in 1981 and soon became one of the decade's most infamous and influential bands. From 1983 to 1990, the Crue ruled the hard rock world with 4 consecutive smash albums, unleashing a rash of decadent rock anthems and single-handedly raising the bar on hard rock mayhem. That's why Motley Crue is number 4 on our list of top 40 pop metal bands of all time.
Motley Crue was running the 80s, come on. Everybody was trying to look like them, sound like them. There wasn't enough devils to go around.
That period of music was bombastic, loud, decadent. Motley Crue probably represented the most outwardly public bad boy band of that period.
Well, I am as wild as everyone might think I am.
You know, we're f***ed up. You know, that was our point in life, was to just see how f***ed up you could get. Excess is best. That was our, like, motto.
Hardcore mother that love to party and have a lot of fun. Nicky would be crashing cars and ODing every day.
Fortunately, the band's appetite for destruction was equaled by their talent. At the end of the 80s, they landed 2 top 10 singles, Dr. Feelgood and Without You.
We just wanted to play good, you know, hard rock music, something new and innovative and fresh. And I think we captured that pretty well.
I missed Motley Crue completely when they were actually making records. I had no interest. I just thought it was all kind of distasteful. And then just about 3 or 4 years ago, I went and bought Shout at the Devil and just fell in love with it.
In 1999, drummer Tommy Lee split after 19 years to form his own band, Methods of Mayhem. But the crew pushes on, releasing 2 new records and causing near chaos on the road.
Are you still there?
And we definitely pushed the envelope more than any other band, in my opinion. We just didn't care if we had a hit record or if we died. We didn't care which one happened. As long as something happened, we were not going to be bored.
Bon Jovi arose from Sayreville, New Jersey, and went straight to the top. They had it all. They pulled at your heartstrings, tugged at your rebellious side, and blew out the speakers in your car. But it was Bon Jovi's music that had the biggest impact. John's frizzy locks and the band's acid wash style touched off a fashion frenzy, and their high-octane stage shows made them arena rock gods. These Jersey boys ruled the 80s, selling over 25 million albums, scoring 5 #1 hits in 5 years, and becoming one of the biggest bands in the world. Big enough to make them #3 on our list of top metal bands of all time.
The biggest rock star from the 80s, I think, would have to unquestionably be Bon Jovi.
They had so many songs that were commercially oriented, really big hooks.
What made them huge was how they were imaged and how sexy they were.
Long hair, you know, the clothes, all the cliches. We lived them. Lived through them, fortunately, but lived them.
John's own coif became something of a national phenomenon.
I guess I'm the credit or blame for the 80s long hair, you know, like every kid in the mall looked.
The band's explosive concerts.
That's what the arena experience was in the mid-'80s, to be at a Bon Jovi show.
It's my life now or never. My life.
They got together in 1973, but it took 11 years and 2 albums for Twisted Sister to make it big. That's when Stay Hungry went all the way to #15 on the mighty Billboard album chart. That album has gone on to sell over 3 million copies thanks to anthems like We're Not Gonna Take It and I Wanna Rock. And the rebellious videos, big hair, and freakish image had parents of the 80s and the U.S. government terrified.
He was like a drag queen, and it was so makeup and glammy, but their music was tough as nails.
Twisted Sister was the only band that could wear makeup and be tough. You know what I mean?
Those guys were a ton of fun. And Dee Snider, kick your ass.
No band dominated videos like Twisted Sister.
It was a real life, you know, a Roadrunner cartoon. That's what we were trying to create. But we were the Roadrunner, and Dad was Wile E. Coyote, and he was getting dragged down the stairs. I'm sure my kid wants to do it to me. Come on.
I don't think anybody packaged the antisocial, anti-parent, leave me alone, I just want to rock.
All right, Mr. Sister.
Twisted Sister didn't just talk the talk. In 1985, frontman Dee Snider walked it all the way to Washington, where he took on the Parents Music Resource Center, a coalition that wanted to slap warning labels on rock albums with explicit lyrics.
I'm trying to get adults to see that heavy metal is not totally a bad thing.
The experience was really a disappointing one. I thought that I would be carrying the flag into battle and the whole industry and all the bands and the fans would follow me in. And I'm running in there with the flag and I turn around and nobody's there. And the industry caved in within a week and gave them the stickers. The truth is, there's plenty for Twisted Sister to be proud of. The band's no-holds-barred classics and comic antics remain some of the most original and uncompromising chapters in the hair band era.
We had a few albums in a few years, and then we burned out. But we definitely scarred a few minds, which is kind of nice.
It was really the last era of the rock star. It was the last era of when musicians were kind of happy to be rock stars. The arena show, the dressing up, everything that went with it.
This is the moment you've all been waiting for. Time for the unveiling of the #1 band on our countdown. Now, I'd like to say that I don't mind being bumped from the #1 spot for this band. They had it all. They took it to the nth degree. It was like nothing we had ever seen before and probably will never see again. The decade of decadence was all about excess, and our #1 band carried the flag proudly. In 1986, Poison released their debut album, Look What the Cat Dragged In, and quickly became the undisputed kings of glam metal. During their 5-year reign, no other band raised more hell, dressed more outrageously, or racked up more chart-topping headbangers than this LA-based foursome. In a decade ruled by power ballads, party anthems, and teased-up hairdos, Cece, Bobby, Ricky, and Brett delivered it all, bigger and better than anyone. That's why Poison is the #1 band on our countdown.
Thank you.
The 80s were reflecting a time where there was excess. Whether it was the way you looked, whether it was the way you lived your life, more was better.
Poison took what we did a 10 steps further. They have the whole spirit of rock and roll thing with the big entertaining look, you know?
We wanted to be glam because all of us came from a very drab existence, and part of why I play music was to escape and be out there and be outrageous.
Everything about the band was outrageous. Their lives off stage were a blur of sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
It was out of control. I mean, the things that we've seen, done, experienced, whatever, I've seen things that people shouldn't see.
I think we're nice people in general, but there's a little evil side to it sometimes.
Sometimes I look at it and I go, man, it's insane. I wanted to live it for the moment I was living in and just let the cards fall where they do, you know?
Amidst all the mayhem, Poison became an inescapable musical force. By 1991, the band had scored 3 consecutive multi-platinum albums and a string of arena-rocking hits that fans are still pumping their fists to. The band got together for a sold-out reunion tour in 1999. The following year, they released the live album, Power to the People.
I think the ingredients that help make Poison successful is the fact that the chemistry between Cece and Bobby and Ricky and myself works. And I'm not saying we don't all have different ideas and different things we do, but when we get together and we go out there, it works. I think we were doing exactly what we wanted to do. We were having a blast.